This is the Power Break Podcast number 167, titled Dealing with Disappointment. Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Brubaker, along with JT, as we hope you'll stay tuned as we seek to give you a little power in this break to help you succeed in the race of life.
This is the Power Break Podcast with a focus on the spiritual, the mental, and the physical aspects, all to help you succeed in the race of life. For show notes from today's podcast, go to bobbrubaker.com and follow the link for the Power Break Podcast. How are you, man? You're looking sharp again. It's probably because you have a meeting or something.
Well, our video still isn't working here. One of these days we're going to put up video. I don't know, will that help our podcasting numbers grow or discourage people from listening to us?
I don't know, but it'll probably help my hygiene because then I'll actually get up and take a shower and, all that.
We have some fun with this Power Break Podcast, folks. We're glad that you tune in and glad that you tell others about us. Just telling JT, we checked the numbers, and somewhere along the line, we had a real big spike one day. So whatever you're doing to tell others about our podcast, the Power Break Podcast, we appreciate it. And thank you so much for leaving the ratings and the reviews. That might have done it right there. It might have pushed us up to the top. People said, we got to check this out. Anyway, thanks for spreading the word about our podcast and social media. However you do it, word of mouth. I think, JT, you've been spreading the word by word of mouth up there in North Carolina, haven't you?
I have, as a matter of fact. Yeah, I've been telling some people about the old Power Break Podcast. Which is always tricky to find if you put power and break as a separate word. You'll never find it. Just kind of throwing that out. So when you're actually sharing it, make sure you tell them it's one word together. Or the old Google can't find it.
Yeah, and I think there's some people that have similar names, but I had this name for the Power Break. First of all, is it Power Break Prod? Let me check that again. Power Break Power Break Broadcast.
That's right.
That's
broadcast. Yeah.
See, it's a broadcast.
So you're so used to podcast. It's not your fault, my friend.
Yeah, here we are with the podcast. Well, JT, today we're talking about dealing with disappointment. Have you ever been disappointed?
Never. Absolutely never. My life has been perfect.
Oh, wait a minute. What's the Bible say?
What? What were you going to say?
What's the Bible say about lying now? Yes.
Yeah, it's funny. I definitely wanted to say I've never been disappointed, especially since I've become a Christian. I mean, it becomes so much easier, as you can tell by my sarcasm. I am not being serious. But yeah, something. Dealing with disappointment is such an incredibly important part of life. That's one of the things that we've really got out of our way to embrace teaching our boys and making sure that, if they react in a certain way that isn't going to be productive for anybody involved, and definitely them, then, just kind of jumping in saying, hey, listen, I know you're disappointed, but you got to look at it from this and this perspective. Now, I will tell you, my ability to deal with disappointment has changed over the years. It could probably change daily, depending on whether I'm in the Word or not in the Word. Or
good point.
Yeah, but the simple truth is I've got all kinds of examples. Usually, we all react in a very inappropriate way when it's something that means a lot to us. Something that was really important. For me, I would use the example of Largo PD. I had a very productive career when probably about halfway through my career, if you ask somebody, they'd say, oh, that guy's going to be chief someday. Well, politics changed, and, I was no longer on the winning team, and that's the way the world works. And, you want to talk about disappointment. And there were days where I really didn't deal with that well, and it's embarrassing the way I reacted to it. But there were days, when I did, when despite what I wanted, I focused on what I knew God wanted. It's funny. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, because I think there are certain things that we do sometimes that are not productive, but we think we're being productive. But yeah, dealing with disappointment is so important, and it allows you to grow the more that you focus on it and the more that you apply biblical principles. What about you, dude?
Oh, yeah. everything, you get disappointed when you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off, or you're not making as fast a headway as you think it should be. So we all get disappointed. And, as you pointed out, the closer you're walking with the Lord, the more you realize this is not a disappointment. This is actually His way of redirecting our lives and putting something in there that God cares so much about our sanctification. As one old preacher said, He cares more about our sanctification than our comfort. Right. Although He comforts us even in the midst of trying times, but He's more interested in our character becoming more and more like Jesus Christ. Well, we can guarantee that all of us, this is why I said this is one topic that we're talking about today that we can guarantee, put the guarantee out there that we know that this will be hitting everybody that we talk to today somehow, right?
For sure.
And so that's what we're talking about, disappointment. Sometime in life we'll probably be there, probably quite a bit of the time, but how we handle it, that's what's important. Galatians 6 and verse 9 says, Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. And so even when we are disappointed, in Philippians chapter 4, Paul writes and says, not that I'm speaking in need. He says, I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound in any and every circumstance. I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need, or you can put in there disappointment or non-disappointment, right? He says, I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. So don't give up. If you are disappointed, look up and gird up as you press on when disappointed in life. We'll talk more about that now.
Yeah, for sure. Let's continue to talk more about that as we go to your blog. Folks, if you haven't been to BobRubecker.com, I highly suggest you get over there, check out the resources. There's some great books in there. The Battle for the Mind, of course, you've heard me say over and over again, one of my favorite books. Just great, godly, focused, inspirational stuff to help us just really kind of get back on track. But at the very least, I would tell you, get over there and sign up for the blog. It'll show up for free every Monday. And it's just a great way to start the week. But let's continue to talk more about dealing with disappointment, because it's so important, because all of us are going to have to deal with it on a relatively consistent basis, I would argue.
That's right. Well, as I wrote on the blog, that there are thousands of reasons to feel disappointed every day. Some things we just brush off as trivial, and other things we really allow to get under our skin and blast our emotions and overtake our very being. How we deal with disappointment is a choice, and we would all have to admit that sometimes we have not made very good choices as we allow disappointment to conquer our character and bring us down.
Amen.
As we look at disappointment, let's look at a scene from the Bible. There was a man named Jonah in the Bible who was a prophet of God, which meant he was God's mouthpiece. And when God wanted a word said to the people, He would speak through a prophet in those days. And Jonah was given the task to go to a place called Nineveh and tell them that God was going to destroy the place in 40 days. Well, we all know the story of how Jonah ran from God's orders and ended up in a storm in the sea. And being thrown into the sea, he was swallowed up by a great fish prepared by God. And in the midst of that fish, Jonah repented while in the belly of the great fish and was willing to do whatever God wanted him to do. So God caused the fish to spit him up, and he went into the city of Nineveh and preached God's message. Lo and behold, the people repented, and God showed them mercy, which made Jonah very disappointed, to say the least. It caused him even to be angry with God. Jonah did not like the people of Nineveh. And we're told that as he ran from God in the beginning, he knew that God would show mercy to them. And he didn't care for that. So when God did show mercy to the people of Nineveh, he was beyond disappointment. He was ticked off, JT.
I get it. I was laughing because I'm like, oh, yeah, been there, done that.
Yeah. So in Jonah chapter 4, verses 2 and 3, it says, he prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is it not this what I said when I was yet in my own country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. Therefore, now, Lord, please take my life, for it is better for me to die than to live. Can you believe that? You ever felt like that because you were just so disappointed? You said, I just better to be dead than this. Maybe you didn't verbally tell God off, but you thought about it. Now, the story of Jonah and his disappointment is the fact that Jonah missed out on the good that God was doing all about him. and in him and for him.
Right.
Jonah was saved from the storm, the belly's whale, or the whale's belly, or the fish's belly there. Jonah was also given great success as a preacher, in that the people of Nineveh to whom he preached actually responded, okay? And Jonah was disappointed because these things didn't turn out the way Jonah thought they should. Before we pile on Jonah, though, consider how many times we dwell on the disappointments of life and miss out on the good that God is doing around us and even in us, as we need to take a step back and look at the situation from God's point of view. Many other things, but that's what we're talking about, dealing with disappointment, and we look at how not to deal with disappointment the way that Jonah did.
Yeah, and I think we're all guilty of dealing with it the exact same way, depending on what we think should happen. I mean, the whole story is just so incredible. Number one, I admire Jonah's stubbornness, because, man, that dude was stubborn. Just spent the whole story trying to get away from God. That word is there for us to understand, at the very end of the whole thing, God's going to get his way whether we're on board or not. So
that's right.
It's such an important perspective to understand that. I look back, and there were times where throughout my career, like when I actually started the active shooter program, which went on to become the most it was the most successful public relations and training program the Largo PD's ever come out with. And those aren't even my words. Those are words that other people have said about it. There were part of me that did that out of, oh yeah, you want to be like that? Take this. It was almost like, I'll just be twice as successful. It was we talked about it before. It wasn't a healthy way to look at it. So
that's right.
Yeah. But God got his way no matter what. I just ended up being miserable through some of it because I wasn't on board. So
that's right. You would say that about Jonah. God was merciful to Nineveh, and he was actually merciful to Jonah in teaching him the lessons. But isn't it interesting how Jonah just, you might just say that God actually did this for the development of Jonah.
Yeah, that's right. And I would definitely say, looking back on it, he did it for the development of me, for sure. No question. Yeah. No question.
Well, the article is called "Dealing with Disappointment," and you'll find that on the blogs as well as other blogs there at my website, bobbrubaker.com. Check it out today, Dealing with Disappointment.
So what else is going on, Bob? Anything new we need to know about this week?
Thought I would bring up the book that was started out as kind of a disappointment to me, but it's called One Breath from Death, Look What God Can Do. And that is the book describing my experience in 2005 when I went to National Jewish Medical Center thinking that they were going to find a cure for what was ailing me, which I was dying from Pseudomonas bacteria infection in my lungs. Thought that would be a quick fix, and we'd have a lot of trips going around Colorado while I was getting outpatient treatment. But it turned out totally different, and 6 weeks later we did leave after an experience of being one breath from death, and I described that experience and about things that God taught us in the midst of that, and it could have been a big disappointment, but we came out very grateful that God spared my life and brought us through learning many lessons of how He has promised that He will never leave us nor forsake us. So check it out. It's the book called One Breath from Death, and the subtitle is Look What God Can Do. You'll find that book at bobbrubaker.com. And while you're there, check out the sermon links to the sermons I preach here at Christ Community Presbyterian Church in Clearwater, Florida. Going through the book of Acts currently as we inch by inch, chapter by chapter, go through what is going on dealing with Paul in Ephesus at the present time as we record this. And some good stuff there. He's just about is coming up this Sunday that I'll be preaching on when he was confronted by Demetrius the silversmith. And the next thing you know, there's a big crowd in the amphitheater, and they're ready to skin Paul alive.
Which was actually pretty common back then.
Yeah.
Talk about disappointing.
That's right. Yeah. Well, check it out. It's all these things, the books and also the sermon links at bobbrubaker.com.
This is the Power Break Podcast. I'm JT along with Bob Brubaker, and this is time on the podcast for questions and answers. If you have a question for me or Bob, feel free to email me at jt@bobbrubaker.com. I love your last name, man, but I just choked on it. I apologize.
No worries.
So once again, it's jt@bobbrubaker.com, and we'll get to answering that on an upcoming Power Break podcast. Question number one from the spiritual side.
Before we get to that question, let me just say that sometimes we don't edit these things. So what you get is the real thing when you hear Bob and JT on the Power Break podcast.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. I'm actually, I'm grateful for how many times I get your name out quickly and I don't choke on it. So I'm pretty grateful about that. Anyway, so
I had a problem. I sometimes have a problem with it. So there you go.
But it's the coolest name ever. Anyway, all right. Well, except for Jesus, but I digress. Question number one from the spiritual side of life. Let's talk more about the reference you made in your blog about Jonah. Such a great story, such a powerful lesson in there about God and how God works through us and with us and for us. Why do you think he was so mad at God, and what does that have to do with us?
Well, let me just go to the 4th chapter of the book of Jonah and actually read from there and just make some comments as we go along. It said it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. That was the fact that God had mercy on the people of Nineveh, that they actually repented in sackcloth and ashes. I mean, this is from the king to the lowest. Matter of fact, they even had the cattle. It's such a lowly estate.
Pretty awesome.
They fasted and prayed and confessed their sins, repented before God. And so Jonah was very displeased about that because he went to the hillside on the side of the city waiting for God to send down fire from heaven like he did to Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, he prayed to the Lord. This is in Jonah chapter 4, verse 2. He prayed to the Lord and said, "Is not this what I said when I was in yet my own country, and that is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish? For I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful and slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster." Okay, so he knew God was like that. By the way, was he a recipient of that attribute of God, those attributes?
100%.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So because he didn't carry it out on the Ninevites, he's really ticked off. He says, "Therefore now, O Lord, please just take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." Well, the Lord said, "Do you do well to be angry?" And Jonah went on out of the city and sat to the east of the city and made a booth for himself, and he sat under the shade till he should see that what would become of the city. He still hoped that God would turn fire from heaven and burn up the city. Well, the Lord had appointed a plant and made it come up over Jonah, that it might be a shade over his head and save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. So God was gracious to him right there. But then in verse 7, when the dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant so that it withered. When the sun rose, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah so that he was faint. And he asked again that he might die, and said, "It's better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Do you do well to be angry for the plant?" He said, "Yes, I do well to be angry, angry enough to die." Okay? And the Lord said, "You pity the plant for which you did not labor, nor did you make it to grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should not I pity Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle?"
Yeah.
So Jonah is ticked off because of a plant. So the point is, when we get disappointed and we dwell on that disappointment, don't we make stupid decisions and don't we say stupid things?
Oh, gosh, yeah. It's so funny because how many times have all of us, if you haven't done this, then, man, you are a way better person than I am. But how many times have we enjoyed God's grace and God's forgiveness and really God's blessing? Have we enjoyed it? But man, are we so angry that somebody that we think doesn't deserve it gets to enjoy it as well. so hypocritical, but a lot of it has to do, we've just lost that focus that we need to have, which is we are all children of God. Whether you like that person or you don't like that person is irrelevant to what God will do for all of us, right? And God will and do what he sees fit. And we really don't have the right to be critical of that, even though we want to. Badly.
Yeah. I heard this old preacher say one time that it is the mercy of God that sometimes he doesn't answer our prayers, because if he answered every prayer of everyone, we would see people destroyed here in Pinellas County. People destroyed on US 19.
Right. That's exactly
the car cut me off. Boom! It's just destroyed.
Could you imagine that?
Yeah. Oh my God. That is basically what happened to Jonah, and the lesson from Jonah, that let's just keep our cool and not express our disappointment so much, because God has a purpose for all things, and we are to submit to him and know that he has control. So anyway.
Yeah, and he also, sneaking in there, you can't really hide from God either. Because it always makes me laugh that Jonah went all the way to the bottom of that boat.
Yeah.
All the way to the bottom, thinking, if I just stay all the way down here, I'll be out of sight, out of mind. It's so funny. All right, question number 2 from the mental aspect. So what are some practical things, and this part I absolutely love, what are the practical things that we can do when we face disappointment? Because we're all going to face it.
The first thing I put down is a lament. You hear me talk about that quite a bit, because a lament is, of course, making sure that we address God properly and with respect, but we also be very honest and open about a complete complaint to him, as well as our request to him, and then we express our faith in him. So in that lament, there's a psalm that I sometimes go to and that I'll be covering next summer in our summer series in Psalms. But Psalm 77 is what I call emptying the cup. And the reason I say that is because many times we're holding out our cup to God and say, fill it with your blessing. And it's like that old coffee cup. Now, back in the day, before I was in ministry, I was in radio and television, and I worked at this radio station where you would go in. I would go in the evening, and there was a coffee pot there, and it was there. It was there all day, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It was pretty bad. Can you imagine taking an old coffee cup that's kind of moldy and everything else and holding it out and saying, "Well, just fill this up." Okay, so that's the problem. We have all kinds of baggage in our lives, and a lot of it is the disappointment we've never dealt with, even by a lament, and that's what happened in the book of Psalm 77, where the psalmist is just reminding himself that God has not come through and he's disappointed, and so he starts to express that. But as he does, and this is where I feel like a lament does when we express that, even with an expression of hope, that he realizes how good God has been, and he changes his tune completely in Psalm 77.
Right.
And that's what it is, to empty the cup, just empty it before God, and that's the way we do that in a realistic way is in a lament. And so then, as we lament, the second thing I would say bring up is gratitude. Expressing gratitude changes the whole disappointment thing. Realize maybe you're running late and the traffic is not moving for a purpose that God has in mind to even protect you, and so we need to express gratitude. And the fourth thing is hold on to God's promises. And God's promises are, as it says in the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 20, that they're yes and amen in our Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah, no, it's funny because this is what I have found so often as I actually will pray a prayer of lament. I find out that after I say it, and a lot of times I say these out loud, after I say it, I realize just how ridiculous it is for me to be upset about it. A lot of times just hearing it out loud gives you the perspective of, wow, that's really dumb. And it really brought me into the next part of the lament, which is the gratitude. Like, man, I'm focused on this, but look at what else I have in my life. This is phenomenal. And the promises of God, man, how that is probably the most important thing that I will focus on is the promises. And to me, number one is that he's always with you, that there's
that's right.
always somebody there with you, guiding you and being, making sure that, as long as you stay focused on him, that your paths are made straight. What an incredible promise. So, yeah, I love laments, and really I cannot say to people more passionately, try it. If you've never actually prayed a prayer of lament, I think you'll find there's a reason why God put that in our toolbox. They're so effective for us.
It can actually save you some money instead of going to a therapist.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
We're not putting down therapists, but just saying that God has his way of actually therapy, as you just described.
Yeah.
That when we go to him in a lament where we address God, we don't just start complaining, but we then offer our complaint fully and honest to him, and then he says, well, make your request. What do you want me to do? And we make that request in a total honest way, but then we end with an expression of faith that we believe he's going to do right, and that, of course, is often expressed in gratitude. So it's good for us. It's good therapy, but it's also God-honoring. So that's why there are so many laments in the book of Psalms. Out of 150 Psalms, at least 50 could be considered laments.
That's crazy. Yeah, it's pretty significant. It tells you how important, for sure. All right.
That's right.
Question number 3. We're going to turn to the physical aspect of life, as we always do. So let's talk about making changes in our workout routine.
Well, isn't that hard? Isn't that hard to make changes?
Yeah.
Even when you know you should?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the biggest issues, is a lot of times, like weightlifting. I stopped enjoying weightlifting. I can't even tell you when. I mean, we're talking probably 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I stopped enjoying weightlifting. But I know that I need to have it in my routine. So, it's important for me to keep that kind of in mind. But yeah, it's so hard because this is what I do. I will come up with a routine that's comfortable. I get comfortable, and then I don't have to focus on what I'm doing because I'm so used to doing it that I can let my mind wander. For me, I really need to make sure that I stay focused on things in my workout. And if my workout gets to a point to where I can think about something else, I change my workout. Like, if you can get lost in your thoughts while you're working out, you're really not present. So for me, that's actually that's why I love mountain biking. Like if I start focusing on something completely different, I'm going to end up over the handlebars relatively quick because you got to pay attention to what's going on around you. But yeah, what say you, my friend?
Well, I came across an article from Dr. Jonathan Su on the internet, and I just found that he mentions that health researchers have developed several theories of behavioral change over the past few decades, and having worked on these theories for some time, he put together some 5 steps that help us to be effective in overcoming the challenge of change. And it's especially true in workouts because if we don't have a change, if we don't make the change, sometimes we lose out on what will actually make us better. He says, first of all, acknowledge and accept the fact that I do need to change. That seems realistic, right? Okay.
Yep, for sure.
I do need to make this change. Secondly, find the compelling reasons that you're making the change. Third, take baby steps in making the change. That's where the hard part comes because sometimes we say, I need to make this change. And all of a sudden we bite off too much. Always think of that when people say they're going to start a running program.
Oh, for sure.
And they'll set out to go, and I always say they take 2 big leaps that are probably really bad. Number one, they go too fast and they go too far.
Yep.
And there's a guy named Jeff Galloway, by the way, that really helped to stop that when he said, it's okay to walk.
Yeah.
For sure. He promoted the fact that instead of running 26.2 miles in a marathon, just run for 3 minutes or whatever time you set and then rest, just walk for 30 seconds and then pick it back up. And so you're not running 26.2 miles, you're running for 3 minutes. Anyway, it's interesting that was actually proven to be very effective in a strategy for accomplishing a marathon at a good time. But also step 4, Jonathan Su writes and says, shift your state and take action. In other words, instead of glooming about the change, just say, okay, here's what it's going to be. You take baby steps, get it going, and then accept the setbacks. Those happen, and also celebrate the wins as you're making those changes. So anything further that you have to say on that, making changes even in your workouts?
No, I guess yes. The answer is yes. I don't know why I said no.
Yes. The answer is yes.
The answer is yes. It's so important to keep your body guessing that I think we forget that that is something that has such a positive effect on your body to keep it a little bit on the shock side. Now,
exactly.
You touched on it a little bit. You don't want to go crazy. You haven't run in 6 months, but you're going to go out and try to do 7 miles. Well, life's not going to be fun for you at the end of that. Even if you make it, the next day or the day after that's going to be miserable. So, don't shock your body to the point to where you're not going to be able to do something the next day. But constantly changing things up really keeps you fresh, and it really has a positive effect on the way your body reacts to exercise.
That's right.
How many times have we've all plateaued and been like, man, I don't know why I'm getting any stronger. Well, it's because your body's not shocked. It's comfortable. So being a little discomforted is actually a really good thing. I bet our friends over at Strong by Design could probably add a whole bunch to that.
Yeah, they sure could.
Yeah.
Well, in all things, though, it does take discipline to make the changes and see yourself through the changes. But as we point out each week, that discipline makes the difference in all aspects of life. Check out today's show notes at bobbrubaker.com. Click on the Power Break podcast. Today is show number 167.
Man, that's crazy. And submit your questions by email to jt@bobbrubaker.com and listen for our answer on an upcoming Power Break podcast.
Quick word for the book that we're offering this week, and that is One Breath from Death, Look What God Can Do. The story of my near-death experience in 2005. God graciously spared my life, and I was able to write about it afterwards and how I dealt with that disappointment. God has been gracious to us. Check it out. It's the book called One Breath from Death, Look What God Can Do. You'll find it at bobbrubaker.com.
Well, thank you for joining us for the Power Break podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review wherever you've downloaded the podcast. And check out show notes, news, Bob's weekly blog, and other cool things at bobbrubaker.com. And listen next time for the Power Break podcast.